A doctor refuses to operate on a poor woman and then discovers that she is the daughter of the most important surgeon in the country and undresses. Dr. Thomas Aldridge's office displayed a luxury that reflected his status in society. The walls were adorned with framed diplomas, recognitions of his illustrious career, and photographs from social events where he had been the guest of honor. A large mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that provided comfort and ostentation to clients who could afford his expertise. He considered himself an artist, and his patients mere blank canvases for his surgical skill. The doctor, with well-groomed grey hair and a perpetually critical gaze, did not hide his disdain for anyone who did not meet his standard of wealth and influence. That morning, while examining a patient in his consulting room, the landline rang incessantly. Aldridge answered with an impatient tone. "Yes, what is it?" "I'm busy," he grumbled, his eyes fixed on a colleague's report. He didn't care about his secretary's complaints. His priority was to maintain the impeccable image he had cultivated over the years. A light knock on the door interrupted his monologue. It was a tired-looking woman, dressed in simple clothes that seemed to have seen better days. Her hair was in a messy bun, and her red-rimmed eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Aldridge quickly assessed her, making a face of disdain. "Can I help you?" he asked, almost disinterested. "Dr. Aldridge, my name is Emily Warren. I need help for an urgent surgery," she said, her voice trembling but firm. There was a mix of hope and despair in her gaze. "A surgery? And what is your condition?" he replied, looking her up and down. "I'm sorry, but my time is precious, and I cannot attend to everyone who shows up without an appointment. Besides, you don't look like you can afford the costs of a procedure with me." Emily felt the weight of his words like a blow. "But please, Dr. Aldridge, I have a serious health issue and cannot wait. I just need a chance," she pleaded, her heart racing. "Go to a social assistance clinic," he said dismissively. "I'm not a doctor for charity. There are more important people who need my attention." He turned to his computer, completely ignoring her. "I can't go to a clinic. I have no one to help me," she replied, her voice choked, tears beginning to slide down her face. Indignation rose in her chest, but she felt powerless in the face of the man's arrogance. "That's not my problem," Aldridge declared, his voice cold. "If you can't pay, I really can't help. Good luck." He didn't look back as she left, her heart heavy and her gaze lost. Emily exited the office, feeling as though the ground had crumbled beneath her feet. The streets were filled with people rushing by, but she felt invisible. The world continued to spin, indifferent to her pain. It was as if her existence, marked by a constant struggle, didn't matter to anyone. With each step she took, tears flowed freely, mixing with the light rain that began to fall. She had distanced herself from a life of privilege, but she never imagined she would face such disdain. As she walked, she thought of her father, Dr. Richard Warren, and how he always said that medicine should be a vocation of compassion. The irony of her situation wouldn't let her be. How could someone who had everything not see the fragility of human life? In that moment, Emily realized that her struggle was just beginning. If Dr. Aldridge represented the worst of medicine, she was determined to find a path that led her to a doctor who truly believed in healing and empathy. In the hospital break room, Nurse Carla leaned toward Dr. Jason Miller, who was sitting in one of the chairs with a worried expression. The atmosphere was typical of a hospital, with white walls and a subtle smell of antiseptic in the air. While the other healthcare professionals drank coffee and chatted, Carla couldn't contain her indignation. "Did you see how Dr. Aldridge treated that woman?" she asked, lowering her voice so the others wouldn't hear. "He just ignored her, as if she were nothing." Dr. Miller, an average-height man with light brown hair, looked at Carla, surprised. He had always admired Aldridge's surgical skills, but that attitude left him uneasy. "I wasn't there, but I heard rumors," he replied in a thoughtful tone. Who was she? Emily Warren. She came here asking for help for an urgent surgery. Apparently, she was in a critical situation. But Aldridge sent her away, saying she should look for a social assistance clinic. Can you imagine that? Carla was visibly upset, her eyes shining with indignation. Dr. Miller frowned. He had heard the name Warren before. Her father, Dr. Richard Warren, was a legend in medicine. The weight of the surname was not just in its fame, but in the ethics and respect he cultivated. Aldridge's face, with its usual arrogance, seemed more of an obstacle than an example to follow. That's unacceptable, Dr. Miller said, shaking his head. If he knew who she really was, maybe he would have acted differently. Do you think he would care? Carla replied, a bit cynically. To Aldridge, social status is everything. He only sees money and prestige. We need to do something, Miller declared, already getting up. We can't let this stand. I'll investigate. I can't believe a man with Aldridge's reputation would act this way. Do you really think this will change anything? Asked Carla, worried. Aldridge is like a rock, hard to shape. I don't know, but I need to try. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his role as a doctor. If Emily is really who I think she is, this could end badly for him. Dr. Miller began to walk through the hospital corridors, his mind buzzing with the implications of what he had just heard. With each step, he thought about how Aldridge's arrogance not only affected Emily's life, but also the reputation of medicine as a whole. He headed to the medical records room, where he started searching for information on Emily Warren. The computer screen illuminated his face as he typed in the name. When the data appeared, his heart raced. It was true. He was right. Emily was the daughter of Dr. Richard Warren, one of the most respected surgeons in the country. The weight of that revelation left him in shock. How could Aldridge have disregarded such an important patient? Miller quickly stood up, his mind now racing. Aldridge's arrogance could have much larger consequences than he had imagined. He needed to find Aldridge before it was too late. Meanwhile, in Aldridge's office, the doctor was absorbed in his thoughts, oblivious to the turmoil his attitude had caused. He was reviewing some medical records when, suddenly, he heard the name Emily Warren echo in his mind. The image of the woman who had entered his office stood out, but he pushed it aside, convinced that his decision had been the right one. After all, he was too busy to deal with people who couldn't pay for his services. But unease began to stir as he pondered what could happen if the truth about Emily's identity got out. The weight of the Warren surname might not directly affect him, but the disdain he had shown could cost him his reputation, something he valued above all else. Dr. Aldridge ran his hand through his hair, feeling a wave of anxiety. What would happen if Richard Warren found out that his daughter had been treated this way? The thought of facing Emily's father put him on high alert. He needed to act, and fast. The reality of his actions began to unfold like a nightmare he could not ignore. Emily Warren had always been a young woman of privilege, surrounded by everything money could buy. However, her life took an unexpected turn, and the search for freedom led her down a path filled with challenges. The memory of days when she felt safe and supported in a wealthy home was now just a shadow, eclipsed by the desire to escape an abusive relationship that left her with deep scars. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman she was becoming. Her once bright eyes now seemed tired and burdened with pain. Sitting in a modest cafe, far from the luxurious meetings she used to attend, Emily observed the people around her. Mothers with small children, couples holding hands, everyone seemed so happy, while she felt like a stranger in her own life. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness she felt inside. At the same time, the worry about her health became a constant in her mind. The pain that wouldn't let her be and the lack of proper treatment tormented her. One morning, while walking through the streets of her new city, Emily decided it was time to seek help. The memory of the disdain she faced when entering Dr. Thomas Aldridge's office still bothered her, but the urgency of her condition pushed her forward. I need a doctor, regardless of what happened, she thought, determined not to let prejudice ignore her again. But she knew that the surgeon's selfishness could be a greater obstacle than her health condition. The decision to move to the distant city wasn't easy. Emily had left behind not only the comfort of her old life, but also the protective figure of her father, Dr. Richard Warren. Although he was a renowned figure in medicine, she didn't want him to know the severity of her situation. The last thing she wished for was to burden him with her pains and frustrations. Their relationship had always been a mix of love and pressure, and she feared that this revelation could shatter the ideal image he had of her. I don't want to be a burden to him, she whispered to herself as she looked out the cafe window, lost in thought. This phrase echoed in her mind like a mantra, a reminder that she needed to move forward on her own. However, the internal struggle between pride and the need for help was constant. The silence between father and daughter became a deafening echo, and each day that passed without him knowing about her condition felt like a punch to the gut. Meanwhile, in the city she now called home, Emily began to take on small jobs to support herself. The simple life she had desired brought its own difficulties, but there was a sense of freedom that accompanied it. She enrolled in a crafting course, something that had always fascinated her, and discovered a new passion. The hours spent creating unique pieces made her forget, even if just for a moment, the pain that accompanied her. Maybe I can find a new path, she thought as her hands worked with clay, shaping forms that reflected her feelings. But amid this quest to rebuild her life, her health continued to deteriorate, like a persistent shadow that wouldn't let her be. The pain, once mild, had now become a constant reminder that, even far from everything, she still needed to face her demons. One night, while gazing at the stars, Emily allowed herself a small moment of weakness. "Why is it so hard?" she whispered to the sky, as if expecting an answer. "Why can't I just be happy?" But the truth was that happiness felt like a distant, almost unattainable concept. And at the same time, the idea of going back to her father, of opening her heart and telling the truth, felt equally daunting. She took a deep breath, determined not to let fear overpower her. "No, I won't let myself be defeated," she said to herself, looking at the moon that illuminated the night. Determination grew in her heart. If there was one thing she had learned amid the chaos of her life, it was that the fight for her happiness and health was hers, and hers alone. And so, even with the weight of the past, Emily prepared to face what was to come, determined not to let pride stop her from seeking the help she so desperately needed. Dr. Thomas Aldridge hurried down the hospital corridors, a sense of panic settling in his chest. He remembered the expression of despair on Emily Warren's face, the young woman he had dismissed. Now, with the weight of the revelation about her true identity, the pressure was mounting. He had rejected the daughter of Dr. Richard Warren, one of the most respected surgeons in the country. How could he have been so insensitive? "Damn it, where is she?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. He headed to the reception desk, where a nurse looked at him with a concerned expression. The nurse who attended to the young woman. Where did she go? The receptionist, surprised by the urgency of the doctor, replied, "She left about an hour ago. She said she didn't need any more help and that she was going home." "Home?" Aldridge repeated, his mind racing. He knew her health situation was serious and that, on her own, she wouldn't receive the proper care. "You don't know where she lives?" The receptionist shook her head, her eyes filled with pity. "I'm sorry, Dr. Aldridge. I don't have that information." He quickly thanked her and left the hospital, his heart racing. As he walked toward the parking lot, his mind spun around the possible consequences of his actions. What if something happened to her? He couldn't bear the thought that his arrogance had put a young woman's life in danger. He needed to fix this, but how? On the way home, Aldridge reflected on his career and the values he had always upheld. From the beginning, he had surrounded himself with wealthy patients, those who brought him prestige and status. But now, the image of Emily, with her sad and desperate gaze, wouldn't leave his mind. He recalled how she had walked into his office, so hopeful, only to be dismissed. When he got home, Aldridge threw himself onto the couch, his mind in turmoil. He felt guilty, but also confused. How could he have let his prejudiced beliefs affect his judgment? That's not me, he thought. I am a doctor. I should care for people, not discard them like they are trash. The front door opened, and his colleague, Dr. Jason Miller, entered. He looked concerned, and as soon as he saw Aldridge, he made a disapproving expression. Thomas, we need to talk. I know, Jason. I made a terrible mistake, Aldridge replied, his voice filled with frustration. I didn't know who she was. If I had known, I would have never acted that way. That's not the only issue, Thomas. The point is that you acted wrongly, regardless of who she was, Jason said, crossing his arms. You need to understand the impact your actions can have. What you did is not just a matter of social class. It's a matter of medical ethics. I know, Aldridge shouted, getting up from the sofa. But what can I do now? I don't know where she is, and I'm terrified of what might happen. Jason looked at him seriously. You need to find her. You can't leave it like this. If you truly care, you need to act quickly. And if you don't act, the consequences could be worse than you imagine. Aldridge felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew Jason was right. He needed to find Emily, needed to apologize, and if possible, help her. Where do you think she might have gone? Maybe the best option is to go back to the place she said she lived. She might not have gone very far, Jason suggested. And I can help you look for her. Thank you, Jason. I don't know what I would do without you, Aldridge said, gratitude evident in his voice. The two left the house in a mix of urgency and nervousness, aware that their actions in the coming hours could change the course of several lives. Aldridge felt like a man on the edge of a cliff, and the only way to avoid the fall was to face his fears and fix the mistake he made. Dr. Thomas Aldridge was nervous as he entered the conference room, where Dr. Richard Warren was waiting for him. The atmosphere was serious, with a long dark wooden table and padded chairs, but the tension in the air was palpable. Aldridge looked at the respected surgeon, who was watching him with a piercing gaze full of disappointment. Thomas adjusted his tie, trying to mask his discomfort, but the awareness of his mistakes consumed him. Dr. Aldridge, Richard began, his voice firm but controlled. You know why you are here, don't you? Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words he didn't want to hear. He remembered Emily, the desperate look on her face when she left the office, and the conversation he had with Dr. Jason Miller. He knew he had crossed a line that he shouldn't have crossed. I made a mistake, Aldridge stammered, trying to gather courage. I didn't realize who she was. It's not just a mistake, Thomas. It's a matter of medical ethics. Of respect, Warren interrupted, his voice rising slightly. You disregarded the life of a patient based on prejudices. That is unacceptable. Aldridge felt his heart race. The glow of success and fame that had always accompanied him now felt like an unbearable burden. He was trapped between the possibility of losing everything he had achieved and the need to justify himself. I didn't act as I should have. I let her appearance sway me, he confessed, his eyes avoiding the accusing gaze of Emily's father. I didn't think she was someone important. In fact, I didn't think at all. I just judged her. Richard shook his head, disappointed. How could you have forgotten that every patient has a story? Every life matters, regardless of their social status or appearance. That's what medicine represents. You should know this better than anyone. Aldridge felt small before that imposing figure. It was as if the weight of his actions was crushing him. He knew he had hurt not only Emily but the very essence of the profession he had dedicated himself to. "I will fix this," he said, finally raising his head. "I will look for Emily, apologize. I will do whatever it takes to repair the damage I caused." Richard crossed his arms, evaluating the surgeon's words. "Do you really believe you can fix this so easily?" he asked, with a skeptical tone. "An investigation will be initiated. Your attitude will not be ignored. You will have to face the consequences of your actions." "I understand," Thomas replied, his voice firmer now. "But please, give me the chance to show that I can change. That I can learn from this. I don't want this to define my career." "This doesn't depend only on you," Richard emphasized, his gaze still stern. "You can redeem yourself, but it won't be a simple task. You will have to work hard to regain people's trust, especially Emily's." Thomas nodded, determination growing within him. He knew he couldn't undo what he had done, but he could try to turn this experience into something positive. It was a first step, but a step that needed to be taken. "I'm going to look for Emily right now," he said, getting up from the chair. "I can't wait any longer. I need to find her and apologize in person." Richard watched as Aldridge left the room, his expression still serious, but a small spark of hope blossomed in his heart. He knew that the path to redemption would be long, but maybe, just maybe, Aldridge could truly change. As Thomas walked through the hospital corridors, his mind was racing. He thought about Emily and how he could make amends for the mistake he had made. The arrogance that had always accompanied him now felt like an unbearable weight. He no longer wanted to be known as the doctor who disregarded the lives of the less fortunate. He wanted to be better. And this new determination propelled him to move forward, even in the face of the uncertainty that awaited him. Dr. Thomas Aldridge walked down the empty corridor of the clinic, the echo of his footsteps resonating in his mind like a constant alert. He sat down in one of the waiting chairs, his head bowed, as memories of his past mistakes flooded his thoughts. On that fateful day, he had been more than a doctor. He had become a cruel judge, deciding who deserved his attention and who was disposable. The image of Emily, her eyes brimming with despair, would never leave his memory. The lack of compassion consumed him. "I need to change," he murmured to himself, his voice broken by the guilt that enveloped him. What had he become? A man who despised human fragility in favor of status and wealth. He realized that true medicine was not just a profession, but a calling that required empathy and absolute respect for life. The weight of recognition was now an unbearable burden. Determined to redeem himself, Aldridge decided he would dedicate himself to a free clinic where he could serve those who needed it most. The idea of stepping away from the glamour and prestige that had always surrounded him frightened him, but at the same time, it was liberating. The journey in search of a new purpose would be difficult, but he was willing to face his fears. "If I can't help everyone, then I am not worthy of being called a doctor," he thought, as a new spark of determination shone in his eyes. Months passed, and the clinic became a refuge of hope and healing. Aldridge began to understand the life stories of each patient who walked through the door. He listened attentively, offering not only medical treatment but also a friendly ear. The change in his attitude was visible. He was no longer the arrogant surgeon who only cared about his image. People began to see him not just as a doctor, but as a human being who had transformed. On a sunny morning, while reviewing patient records, the clinic door opened and Emily walked in. Aldridge's heart raced as he recognized her. She looked different, stronger, but the fragility was still present in her gaze. He immediately stood up, his posture now marked by genuine humility. "Dr. Aldridge," she said hesitantly, but with a touch of firmness in her voice. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Emily," he replied, feeling the emotion tighten in his throat. I'm so sorry for what happened. No one should be treated that way, and I am responsible for that." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of pain and understanding. I know you weren't the same person you are now. My father always said that everyone has the capacity to change, even if sometimes life puts us to the test. Aldridge felt a weight lift off his shoulders. I am trying to become better, not just as a doctor, but as a human being. I want to help you, if you let me. Emily took a deep breath, the tension in her body easing. I came back because I really need help. Not just physical, but emotional too. Life hasn't been easy, and I don't know how to move forward anymore. You don't have to face this alone, Aldridge said, now with a sincerity he never imagined he could show. I'll help you in any way I can. You deserve it. The meeting was transformative for both of them. Aldridge realized it wasn't just about physical healing. It was about restoring dignity and hope. Emily began to talk about her struggles, and he listened with attention and empathy, something that had seemed so distant to him before. What he didn't know was that this interaction would change not only Emily's life, but his in a way he could never have predicted. I believe people can change, Dr. Aldridge, Emily concluded, with a slight smile. And I hope you continue on this path. Aldridge smiled, finally feeling at peace. He had found his true calling, a place where he could practice medicine with heart. Justice was served, and the transformation was just beginning. If you liked this story, don't forget to follow the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. See you next time.